Once upon a time, there lived a man who was more than just a man. He was a symbol, a living legend. David, the architect of kingdoms, the strategist whose visions shaped the destiny of an entire nation, not with the brute force of a mere soldier, but with the incisive intellect of a great statesman.
You do not deserve to go near me.
He was not a king in the conventional sense of the word. He was the preeminent counselor of state, the mind behind the crown, the man whose decrees reverberated through the halls of power and whose decisions determined prosperity or ruin. His life was a tapestry embroidered with golden threads of victory and universal admiration, yet a dark, almost imperceptible thread was woven into that glorious fabric: his absolute and blind devotion to Absalom, his son.
I will not let you die by his hand, brother.
Absalom was not merely his heir, he was his obsession, the living embodiment of his own legacy. The boy with hair so flawless and so abundant, it seemed a living metaphor for the divine grace all believed rested upon him. From the tenderest age, when Absalom uttered his first babbling words, David saw in him not just a son, but the continuation of his own spirit, the promise that all he had built would not be lost in the shifting sands of time. The palace, with its gleaming marbles and crimson draperies, was not simply a residence, it was a sanctuary where the worship of the favored son was practiced with fervent and perilous silence. As David pored over maps and foreign trade treaties, his mind invariably drifted to the image of his son, a 19-year-old youth whose charm was as intense as the midday sun. He would close his eyes and hear the echo of Absalom's laughter, a melody that drowned out the monotonous drone of state council meetings. In the rare moments of quietude, when the pressures of governance became oppressive, he allowed himself to daydream of the day Absalom, now 25, would assume his mantle, not as a replacement, but as a superior, more glorious iteration of himself. This was the gilded cage David constructed for himself, a prison of expectations and a love so dense it suffocated reality itself. He failed to perceive, in his blind devotion, that by treating Absalom not as a fallible human being, but as an ideal, a marble statue to be adored, he was, brick by painstaking brick, erecting the very ramparts of his own downfall. Love, when unseasoned by truth, morphs into a slow, saccharine poison, and David, the master strategist, failed to perceive the most elementary of principles, that even paradises constructed with the noblest intentions can harbor serpents. And the serpent in this instance was not pure malevolence, but a spoiled creature, accustomed to being the center of the universe, who would one day discover that the universe did not revolve solely around them, a revelation that would unleash a hurricane of unimagined consequences. Absalom's childhood was an unending festival of adulation. Every gesture, every utterance, every minor accomplishment was lauded not as a mere developmental milestone, but as a prescient harbinger of his future greatness. His siblings were but pallid specters, secondary characters in the grand narrative where Absalom reigned as the undisputed protagonist. David, in his dread of marring the pristine image he held of his son, eschewed any stringent correction, any no that might blemish the brilliant facade of the 18-year-old. He believed, with the myopic faith of an infatuated father, that unconditional love was synonymous with unconditional approval. He failed to grasp that steel, to achieve fortitude, must endure the crucible's fire, and that character, to attain integrity, requires the firm molding of disciplined hands. Absalom grew up with the conviction that rules were for others, that frustration was an alien emotion, and that his will was a natural law. His charm, his sharp intellect, and his breathtaking beauty were his instruments, wielded with an artist's mastery, convinced that the world was his canvas, and he possessed a divine right to paint it as he pleased. The palace was his playground, the kingdom his future spoils. He perceived the weight of his father's crown not as a burden of responsibility, but as an emblem of absolute power, and he coveted that power not to serve, but to be served. This was the fertile ground from which tragedy began to sprout, not on the battlefield, nor in the chambers of courtly intrigue, but within the coddled heart of a youth who had never learned to navigate a refusal. And when life inevitably presented him with his first significant denial, the fragile architecture of his world would collapse like a house of cards, its shards wounding all in their path, beginning with the man who loved him most, his father, David, the architect of kingdoms who failed to architect the character of his own son. Life, however, has a cruel way of imparting the lessons parents refuse to bestow. Absalom's first genuine jolt to his gilded existence came not from an external adversary, but from within his own family's fold. One of his half-brothers, Amnon, perpetrated an act of unspeakable violence against Tamar, Absalom's full sister. The news infiltrated the palace like venom, and for the first time, Absalom, then 20 years of age, beheld the visage of true injustice, a pain that no charming smile or well-chosen word could assuage. He turned to his father, the mighty David, the paramount judge, the man who balanced the scales of justice for millions, anticipating action, an exemplary punishment, a gesture that would affirm Tamar's blood, mattered. Yet David, ensnared by his own fetters of complacency and perhaps a convoluted web of familial allegiances, failed to act with the resolve the situation exigently demanded. He did indeed rage, but his fury was a flash in the pan, quickly extinguished by the inertia of entrenched power. For Absalom, that inaction was the ultimate betrayal. It was the most thunderous no he had ever received, not uttered in words, but in a deafening silence. The silence of the throne. The silence of the man who could move mountains, but refused to lift a finger to exact justice for his own daughter. In Absalom's mind, that silence was not merely a failure. It was the definitive proof that the system his father embodied was rotten, corrupt, and undeserving of survival. If justice did not flow from the top, then the top needed to be demolished. And he, Absalom, the brilliant son, the favorite, was the chosen instrument for this demolition. The love he felt for David began to transform, fermenting in a barrel of contempt and ambition. He no longer wished to be the heir, he wanted to be the replacement, the rectifier of paternal errors. He did not immediately reveal his plans. On the contrary, he became a master of the art of dissimulation. For 2 long years, he coexisted with Amnon as if nothing had happened, with a coldness that was unnerving in someone so young. He was, in fact, orchestrating his revenge with the patience of a goldsmith. When he finally struck, ordering Amnon's death at a banquet, it was not merely an act of vengeance for Tamar, it was his first non-verbal declaration of war against his father's authority. It was his way of saying in blood that if official justice was ineffective, then justice by one's own hand was the only recourse. The murder shocked the court. David, once again, was paralyzed between grief for the loss of one son and fury at the actions of another. He exiled Absalom, not out of justice, but for political expediency. Another act of weakness that Absalom interpreted as confirmation of his hypocrisy. The exile, far from being a redemptive punishment, became a crucible where Absalom's resentment was purified into a cold, determined hatred. He now saw himself not as a criminal, but as a banished vigilante, a perfect prince victimized by an imperfect system, and he planned his return not as a repentant son, but as a conqueror. Hey there, you listening. Can you feel the weight of this silence? Can you fathom the dull ache of an unaddressed family wound, one that festered until it finally erupted? I have a different request for you today. It's not merely about subscribing or hitting like. It's about you pausing for a minute, stopping this video, and reflecting. Is there any silence in your life? Any unresolved conflict? Any lingering resentment? Any relationship fracturing because the right words were never spoken? Share in the comments, not your entire story, but a single word that encapsulates what this silence signifies for you. It could be fear, pride, loneliness. Let's forge a supportive community here, one that understands that the greatest battles often commence with what remains unsaid. And if this video is resonating with you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. The journey has only just begun, and it delves deep into the soul. Absalom's exile spanned 3 long transformative years. Removed from the gilded halls of the palace, he did not languish. He reinvented himself. His hair, already a signature feature, grew like a mantle of his ambition. He became a scholar of the masses, an analyst of popular discontent. His objective was no longer merely to avenge Tamar, but to become what he termed the Prince of Public Perception. He viewed the failings of his father's governance not as malice, but as a fatal disconnect between the strategist in the palace and the people in the streets. While David focused on macro strategies and international alliances, the quotidian grievances, the taxes on olive oil, the glacial pace of the courts, the sense of abandonment from the farthest provinces fermented like sour wine. Absalom, with the sharp mind of a modern publicist, identified this vacuum. He planned not a military invasion, he planned an invasion of hearts and minds. His return to Jerusalem, orchestrated by Joab, the field commander, was not an act of clemency but a strategic gambit. David, the chief strategist, capitulated, swayed by a potent mix of guilt and a fatal underestimation of his son's political acumen. He saw the return as the closing of a turbulent chapter, not the prologue to revolution. He allowed Absalom back, yet kept him at arm's length, forbidding him from attending court for another 2 years. This was perhaps his most crucial error. Those 2 years of enforced isolation within the city itself were the final crucible. Absalom used this time to observe, to listen, and to map every fissure in his father's kingdom. He received no official visitors, but his servants, trained as intelligence operatives, infiltrated the marketplaces, the city gates, the taverns. He compiled dossiers of dissatisfaction, catalogued the names of influential discontented men, learned the language of the common folk. When he was finally received by David, the encounter was glacial. The father's embrace was perfunctory, the son's eyes inscrutable. The reconciliation was a charade staged for the courts, and both actors, in their hearts, knew it. In that moment, David saw not the son who had left, but a haughty, calculating stranger. And Absalom saw not the mighty father, but a man who, in his complacency, had become vulnerable. The stage was set. Thus began the most brilliant and insidious campaign in the kingdom's history. Absalom would awaken before dawn and position himself with his retinue by the city gates, where peasants and merchants arrived to resolve their legal disputes. He was not known as the Prince of Public Perception for naught. He dressed not in royal regalia, but in attire that inspired confidence, a studied simplicity. With a firm handshake and a direct gaze, he would intercept those arriving filled with hope and apprehension. "From what city do you hail?" he would inquire with genuine interest. And the man, a sheep farmer from a distant village, would bare his heart about his grievance, a land dispute, an unpaid debt. Absalom would listen, not with the haste of an overburdened judge, but with the patience of an ally. Then the masterstroke, the perfectly sown seed of discord. "You see, your cause is good and just," he would say, shaking his head with an expression of sincere indignation. "But alas, the Royal Council has not been appointing judges with the availability to hear cases such as yours. It is a failing of the system." He never attacked David directly. He attacked the system, the bureaucracy, the distant structures. And then he would deliver the line that echoed like a siren's call in the minds of these simple men. "Ah, if only I were made judge in this land. Every man with a grievance or cause would come to me, and I would render them justice." It was a promise of access, of empathy, of resolution. Following this speech, he would complete the ritual with an embrace. It was more than a gesture of solidarity. It was an act of symbolic possession. He, literally and figuratively, stole the hearts of the men of Israel. This grassroots work, meticulous and consistent, spanned 4 years. While David and his chief advisors were immersed in infrastructure and national defense projects, Absalom was building his most dangerous army, an army of loyal admirers. He promised no wealth or power. He promised what people most desired, to be heard and validated. He crafted a powerful narrative. He was the solution, his father's government the problem. And when the popular base was solidified, he made his final move. Under the pretense of fulfilling a religious vow, he requested his father's permission to travel to Hebron. David, still underestimating his son, granted it with a distracted blessing. It was the password Absalom had been waiting for. Hebron was no ordinary city. It was the site of his symbolic coronation, the crucible of his rebellion. The trap, years in the making, was finally closing. The news struck David like lightning on a clear blue day. The hearts of the men of Israel follow after Absalom. The stark, unvarnished sentence was the epitaph of his reign. The architect of kingdoms watched in an instant his entire edifice crumble, not by a foreign army, but by the betrayal of his own blood and the people he thought he knew. David's reaction was not one of fury, but of devastating clarity. He was, above all else, a strategist, and a strategist knows when a battle is lost before it is fought. The flight was decided not out of cowardice, but from the necessity of preserving the hard core of his leadership and repositioning himself. The scene was one of pathetic grandeur. The most powerful man in the nation, now a refugee, crossed the Kidron Valley on foot, barefoot, his head covered, weeping. His most loyal advisors, his foreign guards, all shared in that public humiliation. Yet even in defeat, David's cunning did not desert him. He allowed Ittai, the chief of the Gittite mercenaries, to remain in Jerusalem, a move to sow doubt in the enemy camp. He ordered Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, to return to the city with the ark, not out of disregard for faith, but to turn them into his spies within the enemy capital. The most agonizing, however, was the encounter with Hushai, his trusted counselor. The embrace between the two men was laden with silent grief. David, his eyes bloodshot from tears and sleeplessness, gave Hushai a suicidal mission. "You shall return to the city and declare yourself to Absalom. You will be my eyes and my ears. You will counter Ahithophel's advice." It was a desperate gambit. Ahithophel, the brilliant political strategist now advising Absalom, was as dangerous as an army. David's flight was not a chaotic retreat. It was the first move in a game of chess for his very life, a game in which he was at a critical disadvantage, and the key piece was the broken heart of a father trying against all odds to save the kingdom from his own son. As David and his followers ascended the Mount of Olives, a spectacle of perverse triumph unfolded in Jerusalem. Absalom entered his father's deserted palace, the ultimate emblem of his conquest. Yet physical conquest necessitated political consolidation. For this, he had Ahithophel, the realm's most astute mind, whose loyalty had been secured by the promise of power. Ahithophel's inaugural counsel was brutal, symbolic, and strategically ingenious. He advised Absalom to publicly take possession of the concubines David had left behind in the palace. In a culture where this signified the definitive appropriation of a predecessor's authority and assets, it was an act of utter contempt. Absalom heeded the advice, setting up a tent on the palace roof, visible to all. It was David's ultimate humiliation, a complete and irreparable rupture. Meanwhile, Hushai, David's mole, played his part. Arriving before Absalom, he greeted the new king with feigned subservience. When Absalom, exultant, solicited his opinion on the next move, he found himself presented with two opposing counsels. Ahithophel, pragmatic and lethal, proposed a decisive blow: to pursue David immediately with a small elite force and slay him while he was weary and demoralized. It was the correct strategy. But then Hushai spoke, and he spoke not as a strategist, but as a psychologist. He appealed to Absalom's vanity and his fears. "You know your father and his men," he declared, painting David not as a vulnerable fugitive, but as a cornered, fierce warrior ripe for an ambush. He warned that a hasty attack would fail and demoralize the rebel troops. Instead, he proposed a grand, leisurely solution that would massage the new king's ego, to muster all of Israel's army, from Dan to Beersheba, and crush David with overwhelming, irrefutable force. The council was militarily inferior, but psychologically perfect for Absalom, the prince of public perception, who craved a spectacular victory, not an efficient one. The Lord, as the narrative recounts, intervened to ensure Hushai's inferior counsel prevailed, granting David the precious time he needed. It was the turning point. Ahithophel's betrayal was nullified by Hushai's dissimulated loyalty, and Ahithophel, the man who had always been right, seeing his brilliant advice rejected in favor of a dangerous fantasy, grasped the end. He returned home, set his affairs in order, and hanged himself. The rebellion, at its apex, had lost its brain. David's web was beginning to close in on his son. The final confrontation unfolded not on an open battlefield, but within the treacherous shadows of the Ephraim forest. Absalom's army, vast yet undisciplined, was decimated less by David's swords than by the unforgiving terrain. The forest, the text states, devoured more people than the sword. It was a chaotic slaughter, and amidst that verdant inferno, the event that would seal everything transpired. Absalom, fleeing on his mule, met his end in a grotesquely symbolic fashion. His head, his personal crown of glory, his long, perfect hair became ensnared in the gnarled branches of a great oak. The mule bolted, leaving him suspended, dangling between heaven and earth, powerless, ensnared by his very vanity. The imagery was potent. The man who had risen through appearance and rhetoric, now trapped and neutralized by one of nature's most elemental forces. News reached Joab, the field commander, and here the cold pragmatism of the professional soldier clashed with the morbid love of a father. Joab was not driven by sentiment, he was propelled by realpolitik. He understood that as long as Absalom lived, even in defeat, he would remain a potent symbol, a focal point for future insurrections. The kingdom's peace, in Joab's stark assessment, necessitated the rebel prince's demise. Disregarding David's explicit command, he took 3 javelins and pierced Absalom's heart as he still hung from the tree. His young warriors finished the grim task. The body was unceremoniously tossed into a pit in the forest and covered with a heap of stones. There was no ceremony, no honors, merely the brutal, anonymous end of the man who had aspired to be king. The prince of public perception was silenced not by oration, but by the cold steel of political expediency, and as his men reveled in victory, a messenger prepared to bear the news to David. News that Joab knew would transform triumph into profound sorrow. David waited between the inner and outer gates of the fortress city of Mahanaim, a liminal space poised between two worlds, much as his heart was suspended between hope and dread. He awaited tidings of the battle, but his soul yearned for news of his son. The first messenger arrived, shouting, "Victory!" But David ignored him. His sole inquiry was, "Does young Absalom fare well?" The messenger, evasive, could offer no reply. A second messenger arrived, and the same question echoed, a refrain of paternal anguish. "Does young Absalom fare well?" It was the third messenger, Ahimaaz, who, when pressed, finally uttered the words that sundered David's world. 20,000 fell in battle, and young Absalom too. The ensuing silence was more deafening than any clamor. David heard no more. He did not hear the cheers of victory, nor did he see the wounded soldiers. He ascended to the chamber above the gate and collapsed. The Hebrew text is stark, repetitive, capturing the fractured speech of a man whose soul is being rent asunder. "My son Absalom, my son Absalom. Would that I had died for thee, O Absalom. My son, my son." It was the purest, most devastating cry ever recorded. It was not the lament of a king for a lost heir. It was the lament of a father who would rather lie in that anonymous forest grave than live in a world without his son. He would have traded all glory, all power, all the kingdom for a single breath from Absalom. The victory of the chief strategist was a cataclysmic defeat for the father. In that moment, the kingdom, the power, life itself, lost all import. David's heart, which had bled in silence for years, now hemorrhaged its grief into the universe, an eternal, tragic testament that some wounds, even those of love, never truly close. And so, we arrive at the conclusion of this profound journey through the depths of the human heart. If this narrative has resonated with you in any capacity, prompting introspection regarding your own relationships, the nature of forgiveness, or the ramifications of silence and pride, then our channel has indeed fulfilled its purpose. This is not merely a venue for recounting bygone tales. It is a sanctuary for our collective convergence, mutual learning, and shared growth. I have a special invitation for you today. First, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click that button and join our family. Second, and most importantly, tell us in the comments. It doesn't need to be lengthy. It could be a word, a phrase. What did the story of David and Absalom stir within you? What lesson do you take away for your life? How does this connect with your own story? Your voice matters. Your experience strengthens our community. And if this video resonated with your heart, share it with someone you love, with someone who might need to hear this message. The journey continues, and I can't wait to have you with me on the next one. A fraternal embrace, and see you soon.